Good afternoon. My name is Bishara Addison, and I work for a workforce development organization called Towards Employment. And on any given year, 2/3 of the individuals we serve have some sort of criminal record or interaction with the criminal justice system. As a workforce development provider, we know how a felony conviction can impact somebody's employment prospects. And so we are invested in seeing opportunities and policy that helps to remove some of those barriers to employment. And we believe that issue one is a policy solution that can remove some of those barriers for some of the people that we serve. So I am here this afternoon to tell you a little bit about issue one and why we support it. So you might be wondering, who created issue one? It shows up on your November ballot now through the election, and there's a lot out there, a lot of information, some information, misinformation about what issue one is. And so let's go back to the beginning. Who created this campaign for safe and healthy communities? And this campaign was built by Ohioans and for Ohioans. It actually started a few years ago when a few organizations from across the state, the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, the Ohio Transformation Fund, and the Alliance for Safety and Justice got together to really think through some complicated issues in our criminal justice system. One being that there are so many individuals who are currently incarcerated with drug possession as their most serious offense. We are concerned that we are incarcerating those who have addiction-related problems, and we also believe that addiction is best served in the community through evidence-based practice treatment programs. The second is that there's a rise in the amount of drug use, particularly because of the opiate epidemic. In 2015, there were 80,000 individuals not in Ohio's workforce because of opiate addiction. And so we're definitely concerned about that issue as well. We also know that there are disparities in our criminal justice system. Increasingly, we have been thinking through criminal justice reform and treating addiction as a public health issue. But back in the 70s and 80s, during the war on drugs, we were not treating individuals who were addicted to drugs like crack cocaine and heroin as having a health problem. Instead, we were treating them as if they were criminals. And so how do we go about addressing those things as well? We also know that our prisons are overcrowded. Right now, our prisons are at 130% of capacity. That's not safe for the inmates or the individuals who are currently there. And so they proposed, how about we begin working on those issues, and came together and vetted with Ohioans, residents from across the state, 4 elements that now will be voted on by you on November 6th. So here's the first element of issue one. The first thing it will do is it will encourage more rehabilitation with more earned credit. What does that mean? If individuals are participating in evidence-based programming while in prison, they will have a chance to earn more time off of their sentence for that participation. Right now, we spend about $27,000 a year to incarcerate someone. And we believe that when we are spending those dollars and those resources, we want to make sure that when individuals are released, they are coming home prepared so that they can reenter society successfully. By encouraging this participation, we believe they'll be better prepared upon release. Right now, Ohio already offers earned time credit. Right now, individuals can earn up to 8% off their sentence by participating in programming. Issue one will increase that to up to 25%. And this is actually in line with what other states have done. Over 40 states across the country offer earned time credit, and by increasing our earned time credit to up to 25%, it puts us in line with other states. And this will definitely have a huge impact with those who are currently incarcerated. We believe that this will reduce prison population by nearly 5,000 individuals each year, because they will be eligible for early release because we're rewarding them by participating in this programming. So here comes the second element of issue one, and it's probably what issue one is most known for. The second piece is that it will reclassify felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses as misdemeanors. Felony 4 and 5 drug possession are low-level felony offenses. And it will say that you can no longer incarcerate someone in a prison for a felony 4 or 5 drug possession offense. And it will also say that you can't jail someone for a felony 4 or 5 drug possession offense for their first 2 offenses. It also is retroactive. That means that those who are currently in the community who have felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses as their most serious offense could petition the court that they were convicted in to have it reclassified. And also it applies to those who are currently incarcerated. They could be eligible for early release. So basically what will happen is that we will no longer have a felony 4 or 5 drug possession classification, because those classifications for low-level drug possession will now be misdemeanors. However, this does not impact laws related to trafficking. So if you have an amount greater than personal use, and it's all based on, our drug schedule is based on the type of drug you have and the amount that you have on you and the impact of that drug, how lethal or dangerous it is. And so it varies by drug. But this will not impact trafficking laws. And we believe that this will impact, on average, about 2,100 individuals year over year. But if we were to look at ODRC, Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections data, right now, there are 2,600 individuals who are currently incarcerated where drug possession is their most serious offense. And so we expect this to impact a large number of people year over year. So the third part of issue one, we also believe that we should not incarcerate folks who have not committed a new crime. And right now, there are several thousand people who are incarcerated where they violated their probation but did not commit a new crime. And so what issue one will do is it will require communities to come up with graduated responses of community-based sanctions to address and hold folks accountable for violating probation instead of using prison time. But it is important to note some important distinctions in language. Jail and prison are not the same thing. We often use this terminology interchangeably. Judges would still have the authority to jail someone if they violated their probation, but they would not be able to put someone in prison for a non-criminal probation violation. And so we believe this will also reduce our prison population. Year over year, we expect that to impact about 2,500 individuals who will be diverted from prison for non-criminal probation violations. And that leads us to the last part of issue one, the cost savings. By not incarcerating 10,000 people, that means there will be some individuals who would be eligible for early release and others who will never be going to prison in the first place. We believe that those cost savings will amount to about, let's say, about $100 million a year, and 70% of those cost savings must go to drug treatment and recovery, another 15% for trauma recovery and underserved crime survivors, and another 15% that must be consistent with the intent and purposes of this amendment throughout the justice system. And so we would say that this 15% could be used for things like reentry services. And those dollars would be allocated in a few ways. The 70% of the cost savings that would come out of not incarcerating individuals, this is part of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections budget, That would live with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. They would be responsible for making sure that those dollars and cost savings get distributed. This other 15% for trauma recovery and underserved crime survivors, that would live with the Attorney General's office. And this other 15% would have to be worked out through our General Assembly, but we know must be used for reentry related programming. So let's just go to a recap. Right now, our current prison population is around 50,000 individuals. And it goes up and down in minor amounts year over year, but it pretty much averages 50,000 people. We believe that by putting these reforms in place, on average, we will see a reduction of prison population of about 10,000 people. And if we were to make a conservative estimate on how we would actually arrive at these cost savings, right now, it costs about $73 a day to incarcerate someone, $27,000 a year. We used a conservative estimate around $30 to $40 per day instead of the 73, because we do know that there are overhead costs. We know that just because one person isn't incarcerated doesn't mean an entire facility is going to close. So we use conservative numbers, and that is how we arrived at being able to save the state about $100 million or more each year. And there's also language in the ballot initiative that says that these dollars can't supplant existing dollars. These can only add on to what's already been budgeted for drug treatment and trauma recovery. So here comes the tricky part. Why would we put this in the Constitution? We understand that putting something in the Constitution, one, it's very hard to do. Advocates from across the state, we've been working on this, at least for the signature collection and public awareness about what issue 1 is. We've been doing this for a year. The vetting of the language and figuring out what issues to prioritize to actually be on the ballot, that's been going on for several years. We know that this took a lot of effort to be on our November ballot. And it would take that same level of effort to get it removed from the Constitution. So it's very hard to reverse. But part of the reason is that we've changed the Constitution before, even as recently as 2010, for the exact location of casinos. We also have a citizen's right to amend the Constitution when appropriate. We also know that our prison population hasn't changed. Year over year, our prison population has remained pretty much stable. It's not to say that our General Assembly hasn't done anything around criminal justice reform. They've made some attempts, but none of those attempts has actually resulted in a reduction in prison population. We need an aggressive approach to reduce our prison population because it's expensive, and our prisons weren't built for 52,000 people. It was built for 37,000 people. And overcrowding doesn't necessarily lead to individuals actively participating in programming that's going to help them be prepared upon release. We need to right-size our prisons. We need to create welcoming communities so that when individuals return, they can be supportive citizens to their communities and take care of their families. And that is the goal of issue 1. We want to treat addiction as a public health issue. We want to reduce the number of individuals incarcerated, and we want to make sure there are resources to take care of these individuals when they come home. So how might you get involved? Well, 1, you can endorse. If you go to the website, safeandhealthyohio.com, you can follow us on Twitter, you can follow us on Facebook, and if you are looking to canvass, definitely contact the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. They have organizers all across the state that are putting together phone banks and canvases to help get the word out about issue 1. And I recognize that issue 1 is a very complex initiative, and I'm sure some of you have questions. So you can always reach out to me, and my information is on the screen, and send any questions my way. The most common questions I get are around drug courts. People are concerned that drug courts will go away. Other states that have implemented similar reforms, particularly the reclassification of felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses as misdemeanors, have not seen a reduction in those who are participating in drug courts. Actually, in Alaska, Utah, and Oklahoma, their slots remain full, and they've actually opened up more drug courts. Also, drug courts would be eligible to pursue the dollars that would become available from the cost savings around issue 1. The other big concern that folks seem to have is really around the use of fentanyl. There's been a lot of misinformation out there about fentanyl being potentially charged as a misdemeanor, particularly high amounts. Fentanyl, by the way, is a very lethal drug, and it's something that we should all take very seriously. There have been many overdose deaths as it relates to fentanyl. But the truth is, fentanyl, even smaller quantities than the 19 grams that you'll see in a lot of material as being very dangerous, are regularly charged as trafficking-related offenses. And it's because it's not just how much you have, it's also the ability of a prosecutor to prove you have the intent to distribute. And across the state, in practice, even now, without issue 1, fentanyl in large and small quantities is regularly charged as a trafficking-related offense, and that falls outside of the scope of issue 1. And some of the other big issues around issue 1 would be who created issue 1. There's a lot of concern about there are folks from outside of the state of Ohio who want to impose policy that they believe works for Ohio without actually being Ohio residents. And some outside support has been sought because campaigns are really expensive and you need to find allies when you're trying to push a really big reform. But what's important to note is that the generation of issue 1, how it started, it really started with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative door knocking years ago to determine what are the challenges that are facing our communities. And the issue that bubbled up the most were disparities in our criminal justice system. And so that's when they went down this path of figuring out what are some reforms that have been done in other communities where there's evidence-based practices tied to them and data that supports the implementation of those policies that could work in the state of Ohio. And they arrived at these 4 issues: being able to reclassify felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses, not incarcerating folks who have non-criminal probation violations, and also increasing earned time credit. These are reforms that have been done in other communities, and those communities did see the benefits of cost savings, and they also didn't see a rise in crime, which means that issue 1 has the potential to save our community money, bring resources into our communities, and also will protect public safety. And I would also say the last issue is that most individuals tend to bring up is if you can no longer use prison, will it fill up our local jails? And although that is a valid concern, in the communities that have implemented similar reforms, they have not necessarily seen a rise in jail population. And furthermore, issue 1 is not a be-all, end-all for criminal justice reform. What it is an essential building block as we really have a movement towards criminal justice reform. There's more work that will need to be done in the implementation of issue 1 if it passes. If it doesn't pass, these issues and challenges that our communities face will still exist. And there are other policy priorities in the criminal justice realm that also need to be addressed. And my answer to those who are concerned about the rise in jail population is that the next big policy issue that we need to take on is bail reform. Because if we get that right, that will certainly reduce the number of individuals who are in our jails, and we can stop treating jails as a holding place for those who haven't been convicted of anything. And if you want to learn more about bail reform, check out the ACLU of Ohio website. They've done some incredible research on what we can be doing in our communities to push bail policy reform. Thank you so much for listening to me. And again, on the screen, you have my cell phone number, you have my email address. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, because we all know that we are grappling with some really challenging problems in our communities, but together we have an opportunity to make our voices heard at the ballot box and say to those who are maintaining the status quo that it's time for a radical change. It's time for a change that will help us better serve our communities and make sure that we keep our communities whole. And we believe that issue 1 will be a really good step in that direction. Thank you so much.